We are live here. So, Adam and I have already been chatting, but we're looking forward to everybody joining us here today soon, where we'll be discussing all about, or like everything we covered in the previous video, just in more detail. So that includes filtration, substrate, nitrogen cycle, fish, or like shrimp acclimation, along with how to actually select the right shrimp. And so we have got a lot to cover. I mean, it was definitely a longer video. I need to make sure I have the chat up, actually. Let's see here. I think that should be good. Live chat. So hopefully we'll be having a few more people join us before we actually get started. But to everyone who is here, I hope you're having a great day. We're excited to get to work and teach, or well, not work. We're excited to hang out, share some more knowledge, and hopefully learn some stuff as well. But would love to hear. Hopefully everybody else is doing well. If you guys do have any questions throughout the live stream, please ask away. We'd love to interact to actually, again, try to explain things more if you do have any confusion, or we'll learn something else if we don't know the answer. Hopefully do some research for you. So, yeah. So we are going to be covering today. First talking about filters, we are going to be covering UGFs, some of the pros and cons of each of those. Then we'll be moving into a little bit about fast cycling, plus some issues with it. We'll also be talking, actually, let me move that to this screen here. So, there we go. Okay, so Adam will also be covering more about different, like, the nitrogen cycle, some details that he hadn't covered in the previous video. Then we'll be going into a little bit about substrate depths, and some of the issues with those, or some of the concerns that you might have if you have a thinner versus thicker substrate. Then we'll go on to keeping neocaridina on active substrate, because it's a pretty common question and issue that I see online, and it is definitely doable. Again, I keep most of my neocaridina on active substrate, and that's actually where I've seen the most success, because the plants are really healthy there, as long as you balance it properly. Next, we'll be talking about a little bit more about, like, well, water changes, actually. I think I got confused there. We didn't get to that one in this video, did we? I was thinking about the editing I was just doing. But, so we've got the acclimation process, a little bit more about a comparison of plop and drop versus drip acclimation. We can discuss more problems with problems with imported shrimp, and some of the disease risk, because there's actually some of the research on it is pretty amazing, just how likely they are to have problems, to have like health issues, to have pests and predators coming in with them. So with that, let's go ahead and hop into UGF pros and cons. So under gravel filters, basically what we've got here, we have a couple different kinds. So one is this kind of box style filter, and that is sort of what I've seen referred to as the Asian style UGF. And this is mainly for keeping, this is best used with caridina shrimp. So what happens with this Asian style UGF is you put the UGF down in the bottom of the box, and then you put a small layer of foam, and then you put some active substrate into that. And now what happens is that that UGF is actively pulling water down through the active substrate, and that's just making sure that there's really strong buffering of that substrate, so that way your water stays very, very stable. And I mean, stability is fantastic, but for neocaridina, that active substrate, that low pH, is just not something that you're looking for. So we would generally recommend avoiding these. They just add an extra complication to the tank that no one needs for cherry shrimp. Again, for caridina, there does seem to be some benefits, and I have done a couple tests on the Asian style UGF versus a standard sponge filter that does suggest that the UGF keeps things a little bit more stable, though it's not that significant day to day. The other like kind of older style is going to be something that goes into, it covers like the entire bottom of your tank, and I'm actually having trouble finding good images. I mean, there's kind of like this one here that gives you an idea of it, but it's just an under gravel filter covering the entire base of your tank, so it leaves a little layer of essentially water there where the debris can collect. And I just don't see many benefits to this. So, especially for a shrimp tank, you've got animals that are very tiny as babies. They are potentially getting into the substrate, getting underneath your UGF, and then getting stuck there, or not necessarily stuck, but they are potentially going to be there, and you can't see them. And it's like, why even have those animals in the first place then if you aren't going to be able to actually see them? They probably can get out through the actual uptake tube, but and so it's not like they're in any danger, but you just won't be able to get the full joy of having as large of a colony, or of seeing as large of a colony as you actually have. The other thing is that if I'm thinking about it from a planted tank perspective, which I'm always thinking about plants in a shrimp tank, and when I have that, the UGF is kind of accumulating the debris, but it's not creating any sort of anoxic environment down below. So it's not creating a standard like place for root systems to take place, or for like the bacteria and microorganisms that are generally around the root area of plants. It's creating a very different environment than what you would normally find in nature. And that's not necessarily bad. It might actually help avoid some sort of like bacterial infections from. So if you were trying to frequently kind of aquascape, move things around in your tank, then you could be kicking up debris and having an issue there. But otherwise, it's just not that important here. I apologize. I did not sleep well enough last night. I feel like I'm not quite making enough sense. But Adam, I was wondering if you wanted to hop in here and talk about anything here about UGF specifically.
Sure. I mean, I am biased towards sponge filters. And the bias comes kind of inherent with what I do, right? I have hundreds of tanks, but I have always had dozens of tanks. And when you have dozens of fish tanks, simplicity becomes your best friend. So the under gravel filter for somebody with one or two tanks, to me, it's a novelty. It's not needed. Like, you could do either or, but you're not really getting anything out of it. And for the old school, which is, I'm a fan of old school, but for those old school under gravel filters where it just kind of covers a base piece, I've noticed with exceptionally hard water, so people that would see, if your GH is more than 15, you can see some pretty rapid issues with calcification in there, to where the tubes that it's kind of channeling are so narrow, where it's kind of, proliferating out across the bottom, that I've noticed that they kind of clog up. And I think it's calcium and not like just debris and junk, but sort of no matter what it is. The issue that I've had with them is that when you go to maintain them, good luck. Like, you wind up just buying a whole new one. For me, it was as rapid as within a year and a half I had one go. That's probably an exception and not the rule. I had some that lasted 5 years, but I've had sponges that have lasted the whole 10. In fact, I brought sponge filters over from the first sponge filters I ever bought to my new house, and they're still kicking. So, as long as your porosity of the sponge is acceptable for whatever your hardness is, they don't calcify to an extent where you'd notice significant, water dropping between, the pores. But I'm biased. I like sponge filters. I think it came across in the video too. I think for us to do a little bit more justice on the filter conversation, especially now that we're not just talking to like the broad audience of maybe everybody in the world that's new, we can go a little deeper here in this kind of format. There's lots of different ways to achieve those kind of three types of filtration. And most of them are just variations on the theme of how do I create surface area and how do I have a flow of water that touches that surface area. There's other added benefits of flow naturally, especially as it relates to dissolved oxygen. But for biological filtration, obviously, we're really just moving water across a surface area to try to help the, nitrifying bacteria. We'll talk momentarily about denitrifying bacteria, and I'm excited about that conversation. But for the standard, conversion of ammonia to nitrate conversation, I don't see any added benefit of an underground filter. And it doesn't, under gravel, sorry, I think of them as underground filters, but I wouldn't recommend it to a beginner. They're not my favorite, but there's nothing wrong with it. And I don't recommend canister filters, and some people swear by them. And so I guess it's a little bit dealer's choice, and it's kind of what your purpose of what you're doing. The expansion on that, just for a second, is I watched a video of a guy that is kind of a monster fish keeper. So, red tail catfish. This is, a couple 1,000-gallon pond style freshwater fish keeping. And at that scale, right, a couple 1,000 gallons of one body of water, one tank, I mean, your filtration options, you're no longer looking at a sponge filter. Like, you'd be looking at thousands of
You need
sponge
that
filters. It doesn't,
massive, yeah.
yeah, it doesn't make sense. And so that, I watched back our video that you had did for us, and I came up with the perception that I'm really leaning into sponge filters a lot. Which, when I kind of wrote the slide, I was trying to give kind of a holistic idea of here's a bunch of different filters, pick what works best. And then I watched another video of a guy who's like, I'd never do a sponge filter. And in his situation, he's right. And if I was in his situation, if I had a 2,000-gallon tank and I had red tail catfish, I'm not going to pick a sponge filter either. So a little bit of the conversation is pick the filter that's right for your application. And because we narrowed down the application happens to be Neocaridina shrimp, the sponge filters is a very natural choice, I think.
Yeah. It's not necessarily that UGFs are bad. If you're comfortable with them, great. But sponge filters are just the bulletproof option, even simpler, and they perform the same task just as well, right? Cheaper, everything is generally better about them. That being said, maybe there's some research I do not know about how having that extra aeration underground below your substrate can help keep it clean and help open up more space for some kind of different microorganisms that may benefit your tank. So I'm definitely open to learning about it. If you guys have any questions, or if you guys know more about it, feel free to chime in. But otherwise, we just always recommend the simplest option of sponge filters, to just not have to worry about it.
Yeah, I have one more note in just thinking through what you were saying. I guess one other reason why I've never loved UGFs is that I typically use inert substrate, and I know we're going to talk about substrate, so this is totally applicable. When you're using something that's like eco-complete that doesn't actually, impact parameters, I tend to use root tabs if I'm going to do plants that need that kind of nutrition. And I would have some seeking suspicions about using root tabs with an underground filter. I haven't read any data that that's specifically an issue, but I could definitely see a problem with putting root tabs very close in proximity to there. You can have a deep enough bed of a substrate where it probably is irrelevant, and maybe there's lots of people that do tons of root tabs and it's not a problem. I would ask what kind of root tabs you're using. If you're using something that's a DIY style Osmocote release tab that literally is producing ammonia for the sake of producing ammonia, I would definitely be curious how that is being handled. I mean, I don't necessarily know that that's a big issue, but I never put root tabs in tanks with UGFs, looking back on it. And that limits
I'd be worried about
plants.
it.
Yeah. So if you're just growing, I grow mostly guppy grass now because different purposes, right? But for guppy grass, it doesn't care, so it doesn't matter. I could totally use a UGF. But for, if you're doing anything that's really heavy root feeder where root tab would be beneficial, I don't know. I definitely want to ask around more to see how other hobbyists have tackled it. There might be a big community of people that swear by UGFs, and they are big, planted tank enthusiasts with tons of root tab usage for heavy root feeders, and they, maybe that's out there. I have not seen a lot of that, though. And I have been looking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see anyone, only the generally older school fish keepers might have some UGFs. But unless, again, you're getting into Caridina with the Asian-style UGFs, the standard one that's covering the full bottom of the tank just doesn't make much sense anymore. So let's go ahead here. I think we've covered that topic pretty well. Going back to our next one. So I know we were pretty adamant in the video talking about how we highly, highly recommend doing a slower cycle of your tank. So you're waiting 6 to 8 weeks for the ecosystem mature, even after you see the nitrogen cycle fully complete. After you are seeing that ammonia get converted to nitrate, you would hopefully wait a little bit longer here, because we have seen papers, and we cited some papers that talk about how the microorganism population changes over time. So in that first month, you often aren't going to see that big of a population growth. They barely detect any. And then after that is when they start to see more microorganisms develop in the ecosystem to establish their populations. And that's because the nitrogen cycle and other nutrient cycles have also developed to support that growth. And those microorganisms then benefit shrimp because shrimp are eating that. Like, it is affecting how, like, each like each grab, each time they're grabbing at the biofilm, they're also picking up whatever microorganisms are in there. And so that's diversifying their diet, creating a more stable diet, a more diverse diet, and a more stable ecosystem. Um, Adam, Adam, do you want to cover kind of some of the ways to fast cycle a tank, though, and what are some of the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, I also think this is a good kind of forum for me and you to have a little bit more of a debate format, right?
Sure.
Um, we, I definitely think me and you probably disagree with it, and I think that's totally fine. Like, I think this is a good example in like the hobby where we are both on the pretty same page scientifically of what the purpose and what we're doing, what we're talking about. We've read the similar literature. We're doing the same things.
Mm.
And our perspectives can vary, and that's totally fine. So, like, to me, my sort of mentality is I want the most amount of people to experience the joy of shrimp and fish keeping. And I threw the and fish keeping part in there, and that kind of tailors to a little bit of my mentality, right? Because I really have more of a even guppy mindset sometimes than Neocaridini shrimp set. So
Mm.
overall, if I'm trying to reach the biggest audience of people who might be struggling currently, or they might have been intimidated, or they just never got into it because there's kind of a barrier to entry. Part of it is decreasing that barrier to entry and increasing the lowest common denominator of who can enjoy a fish tank. And so it stems into that conversation we had a long time ago about, does your average aquarium hobbyist need to understand the science of what's going on? And there's arguments on either side. I do think the argument should be, I think it's really cool. I think it's kind of like in engineering, it would be a should and not a shall. Like, you should know it, but is it a direct requirement? And I would say no. I don't think it's a direct requirement for somebody to be able to spit out ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and spit out, the first part of that nitrogen cycle.
Mm.
Whereas, I think you're definitely coming from it from more of a scientific mindset where not only is it a pro, but it's in some fundamental way sort of a necessity at some level. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth at all, but I guess to me, what I'm thinking out here is if there's a way to get people to succeed more, I'm happy with that at the consequence of them knowing less. Hoping
Mm-hmm.
that, in my mind, that hopes them to spark the curiosity to then do it, right? Like, it's sort of like which came first, chicken or the egg kind of thing. I'd rather them have success, then get interested in it, and then learn the nitrogen cycle, rather than never have got interested in it because they didn't know the nitrogen cycle, if that makes sense. And that's definitely how it was for me, I guess, because I kind of started as a kid, right? Like, 7-year-old me didn't really know anything about anything, right? And so, but I got interested in it, and after I had success randomly, then I got more invested in it, got new fish, tried different things, failed more, learned more, and I was able to have, that level of thought process. So, in my mind, I guess I would say I don't think people need all the deepest levels of scientific knowledge. I think it's super helpful. I think people will wind up going that way with success. And so, as it pertains to just a fast cycle, I would support beginners fast cycling stuff, and I'll kind of explain what that means if you'd like me to. But everybody I've ever helped, I've absolutely donated a free sponge filter that's already cycled to, and
Mm-hmm.
I say the nitrogen cycle to them, but I mean it's kind of like saying it to a wall. Like, they're not actually picking anything
A
up.
little rude. Are these your friends?
Yeah, but I mean it's true, right? A new person that
Mm.
doesn't, if you do it for somebody, this is kind of like where I got from your mentality, right? Like, if you do it for somebody, or you kind of bypass, learning through it, you never did it yourself. You never really did learn. And so that can cause issues when other things go wrong, not having the, baseline understanding of how these systems work. That's an issue. But fast cycling to me, I mean, that's the method I use. I don't wait to cycle tanks. I can't most of the time. I'm going to return over a tank. I have too many shrimp in the tank next door for long term. So I have a 10 gallon with 400 shrimp in it. That's not really sustainable long term. I need to get the other tank next to it up and running so I can move 200 of them over. And when I need to do that, it needs to be like tonight. So I'm going to take a glass tank with nothing in it, and 2 hours from now, I need there to be 200 shrimp in there, and they need to thrive. And so, to me, the repeatable method is to fast cycle. And that is, I mean, just another benefit of a sponge filter. I mean, if we're going to just come back to sponge filters. But I absolutely I see both sides of it, and I can appreciate both sides of it a little bit. I do want people to have success, so if you want me to explain it, I can give kind of a process guide to fast cycling, or what we mean by that. But it's to me, it's not forbidden knowledge. I think it is absolutely bypassing, and that's what I meant in the video when I said like the struggle. It's bypassing having to go through it and watch it. To the average person who's not that into the science and they just want to see pretty shrimp, I would think it is kind of a struggle because the end goal to them is the shrimp and not the learning and the science. Whereas, ironically, if they have success and they can keep it and they never learn the science, that might intrigue them enough to then step into a world where they could learn the science, which is two sides of the same coin. That's why I love talking about this stuff, because we're coming at it from the same perspective, just slightly different angles.
Yeah. Okay. Man, there's
Jump in. Disagree.
A lot to go over here. No. I mean, I guess I would start by saying that, yeah, I totally agree that you do not need to know the science, and there's absolutely, I do think that can become a barrier for entry for people if you are not explaining in the right way and explaining in an engaging way. So, with that being said, I do have to say, like, I think that if people don't understand the science, then recommending that like 6 to 8 week grow out period means that after they've set up the tank, they've got a good chance of it happening regardless, even if they haven't carefully been adding food, assuming they have like a pest snail come in, some of the leaves die off and provide a little bit of ammonia for the tank to start cycling, and then they actually do develop a little bit of it. So I do wonder if that allows for more success. So the obvious benefits of cycling for a longer time are those microorganism like communities growing, is just having more food available and a more diverse food, a more stable ecosystem for your shrimp. But yes, you can absolutely achieve that with a more fast cycling method when done properly, and then you just have to make up the difference in the food that your shrimp are not receiving from the environment. And so that's it's entirely doable, as you demonstrate, it sounds like, quite often with your tanks. But if we are thinking about maximum chance of success, I do think that allowing for that time is beneficial. Now, if they have a great friend like you, I mean, after being called a wall, I would still probably accept the sponge filter from you. And it'd be like, okay, here we go. I was insulted, but you gave me something beneficial here, so I'm going to put it in my tank. We'll hope it works out well. And I think that's fantastic. If people are in that situation where they can just get a cycled sponge filter from a friend, wait a week or two, that puts them in still a better spot than, of course, if and then they don't necessarily have to know the science behind it. Hopefully they do find it interesting. But I often don't think that people get interested in it until they have issues. Like, it's
Totally.
the failure that really does push people to learn. And then once we do have that knowledge, then we can help other people who are like in the same position to learn and continue, and hopefully, just improve the lives of their shrimp as well. So, with that being said, the fast cycling method here that Adam's talking about, I'm sure most of you already know it. We've all probably looked it up while we were starting shrimp keeping and wondered if we can do this, because it does seem fantastic. And that's basically, you have a seasoned sponge filter, one that's already been running in another tank for a week or two, and that has a bunch of beneficial bacteria on it that are going to convert your ammonia to your nitrate, and you can just put that in your tank. That's going to precede it, and then you provide an ammonia source for a little bit, whether that's actually animals, like you're saying. That is doable because you already have these communities of microbes that are going to develop so quickly when they're already present on the sponge filter. They can generally adapt to a bioload of shrimp fairly easily, assuming you are watching parameters, doing water changes, and all of that, right? So that's the main way of fast cycling. You could also add a bunch of plants into the tank, and that would be a fairly similar situation as well. Um, you, but is there any? I guess there would be the bottled bacteria as well. Anything, any other ways that you actually do yourself?
The bottle of bacteria is actually kind of my favorite way to do it. That's actually how I did my whole fish room. I actually didn't use pre-seeded sponge filters at all.
Okay.
And the rationale behind that was that in watching a lot of videos on some of the products that Fritz puts out with live nitrifying bacteria, they have very scientific, repeatable success with what they're doing, and it matches, my kind of criteria of standardization, I guess. So, I think I think the bottle of bacteria is a pretty simple way to do it, and I mean, to me, it's sort of a no-brainer. I think I mentioned I'm putting out a video in a couple days here about the whole nitrogen cycle, and there's some parts of it that I think we kind of explain wrong in the hobby, and that there's sort of an overabundance of either misinformation or more poorly informed people that love to hop on and explain, their 5% view of what's going on. And I sit there, with 5.2% saying, look at those guys, right? But I generally think there's sort of just stuff that's missing in the conversation. And I don't know, the bottle of bacteria to me is containing the correct groups in some level of the correct proportions that you're going to need to have success. And it's a battle of maturity, not cycling. So we both know the cycling is sort of the lesser important of the two, right? We talk a lot in the hobby about cycling, but the maturity as it pertains to shrimp is probably 10 times more important than is it cycled. So the bottle of bacteria is an instant start to your cycle. Like it gets you, like it checks the box of I've initiated my cycle to be working, but it does not do anything for maturity. So when you fast cycle a tank, you are then combating all of the issues that you've now created with having a immature tank for shrimp. And to your point, to credit, like, about the beginner, which is more beginner friendly, there's some truth to say that for shrimp specifically, that maturity may be more important than your cycle. So you may as well wait out the cycle, because you should probably wait for the maturity anyways. In my opinion.
Yeah.
But for guppies, and this is kind of where I was thinking of it although we were talking about shrimp, to me about fast cycling, like for fish, the maturity does not really matter to any notable extent. So as long as it's going to consume the waste, the fish are just eating the food you're putting in straight. So they're not detritivores, so they don't have those same kind of constraints.
They eat so much that like a microorganism population of a 10 or 20 gallon could support maybe 1 or 2 guppies versus shrimp. It can support a ton along with the biofilm. So that is part of the difference. You can't possibly rely on the ecosystem itself unless you have a good layer of the bacteria, the biofilm, microorganisms, shrimp, that all kind of get eaten at some extent by the fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're a beginner out there, a true beginner, and you're 30 minutes into this crazy in-depth random podcast style, live stream, I would tell you that you could kind of do it either way. That's my true opinion. You can fast cycle something, buy a bottle of bacteria, or find a friend with a sponge filter they'll give you, and you can fast cycle it, and you can have success. It's pretty repeatable. I've done it a million times. I guess if I was talking to you specifically, what I will tell you to worry about and to actually watch for is not the cycle at that point. It's going to be the actual nutrition of the shrimp. So what that means is you're going to need to feed something that is in some level of powdered format, or you're going to need to ensure that shrimp are actually eating, because the main way that shrimp are supposed to, I say supposed to, but the way they're supposed to eat, in my understanding, is they're eating all the time. They're detritivores. So they're constantly, scavenging is probably the wrong word for it, but they're constantly picking and poking, looking for something to eat. And sometimes they're finding bigger meals, and sometimes it's just kind of nothingness. But it's that very bottom layer of the trophic microorganisms that they're eating. And if you don't have any of that for them, you need to supply their complete nutrition. All their dietary needs come from you. So you should, in my opinion, be overfeeding a little bit. Now, if you're a beginner, we talked about how bad it can be to overfeed, and we're getting out of scope here a little bit. But what that means is powdered foods, probably twice a day, if we're being honest, very small amounts, and you're probably removing excess food every couple of days through sort of a miniature siphon to literally remove physical debris if there is like chunks of physical debris. Because although it's cycled, your cycle probably can't support a ton of breaking down waste. It's still fresh, even though it's fast cycled.
Yeah. Again, if the tank isn't mature, you are going to, yeah, as Adam's saying, you do have to support a shrimp's diet. And so that means feeding, potentially overfeeding, and then more water changes, more maintenance. And so it all just, and then less stability of your tank, and then the ecosystem never really establishes. So it all kind of compounds here. And so that's why we would definitely recommend that you do try to let your tank mature beforehand. That being said, I will say one of the fast cycling methods that I think is the best option is throwing in a ton of plants from another established tank. I think that's actually even more effective than a sponge filter. So you obviously need the filter to provide some flow and just ensure that you have your water cycling so that that your water is flowing so that the microorganisms and bacteria can pull out waste from the water, process it. But having those plants, they always support like tons of biofilm and microorganisms, and they help clean the water. They help remove ammonia from the water pretty often, or most of them do. And so that is potentially even better than any sort of bottled bacteria or sponge filter. As I would feel pretty confident if I threw a ton of guppy grass into a tank that had already been from a healthy tank, then then I could throw shrimp in almost immediately because they have a food source. So that's where that would be one other fast cycling method to think about. Let's see. We've got Scholars Retreats commenting in. Congrats on the 10 new Neos today. I hope they go great. Hope you've been helped. I'm glad that some of the information we've been providing has helped you here. So do you have anything to add, Adam, to the fast cycling discussion anymore? Or do you want to move on?
I probably have a whole bunch. I guess the one last comment I'll make that's kind of quick is to those of you out there that I'm speaking to, people that are other breeders, right? Like people that have kind of done what I've done, especially those of you with kind of multiple tanks going on. Obviously, like I know you guys are fast cycling. That's not even an option. You probably skipped past all this, and you probably already skipped past this anyway, so you won't even hear this, unfortunately. But there's a couple of tips I guess I have for you guys that do fast cycle to really and why it's so tailored to people that are breeding that have multiple tanks. You're already on top of maintenance. You're doing more maintenance than most hobbyists do. You're probably over maintaining what you're doing because you have to. You're kind of creating this situation where you're generating so much nitrate that you need to, like compared to somebody with 10 shrimp in a tank. Like Scholars Retreat, a 10-gallon shrimp tank with some mutt shrimps in there, like he's talking about. That it's not going to be a big issue. Unless you have hundreds of shrimp in a 10-gallon, the maintenance requirements on shrimp are like we talk about it in the next video. I'm excited about it, but it's very minimal. And in many parts of this niche hobby, people would even tell you it's optional, right? Maintenance, for water change levels. There's whole, anti-water change communities if you run into those folks. But where I'm going to that is that if you're going to do this, you have to be ready to do more maintenance because you must overfeed. And so I was hesitant to speak it to that to, the beginner out there that's going to be, they're probably already overfeeding. So if I tell the beginner, hey, just heavy overfeed, you know what to do. You're going to dump the whole bottle of shrimp food in there. Yeah, shrimp like food, right? Like, oh boy, what are you doing here? But to those of you that are obviously knowing what you're doing with, a bunch of tanks at home, I overfeed considerably with powdered foods, and I don't feed stuff like green beans and zucchini and some other foods we'll talk about later right when I do that, because I'm looking to get food everywhere, kind of to help try to get fake maturity as soon as possible. I'm trying to get those carbon sources all over the tank so that I can grow those microalgae and detritus and mulm. Broken down fish waste is kind of broken down fish food waste is part of what is going to help all that. And so I'm kind of just donating it to, the bottom of my tank, knowing that it's going to break down and I have to water change it out tomorrow. That's the only option if you're going to fast cycle in that capacity.
Yeah, all good points. So let's go ahead here. Let's see. Also, as a reminder, guys, please ask questions. We'd love to hear whatever you have to say as well. Say hi to everybody else in the chat. We want to create a community here for these like 5 weeks that we're streaming here, and so we can again build more knowledge among all of us. Also, no question, no comment is silly. Like, I do think that even if we might, so I know that like when I was in class, anytime I got an answer wrong, that was the point where I learned the most. I was remembered that I never wanted to get that particular question wrong again, and so I made sure to remember that information. So please, whatever, no matter, there is no silly question. That we are all trying to learn here. Now, yeah, let's see. We got a couple questions here. Shrimp Cartel. One of my problems is that during those 6 weeks of cycling without fish or shrimp, my tank develops a lot of algae. And yeah, that can definitely be an issue. I mean, in the first 6 weeks, it can get a little bit ugly. There is a lot of, there's kind of an imbalance of nutrients. And so you could reduce the amount of light that your tank is getting, and you'll still see good growth of the microorganisms and the beneficial bacteria. That algae is supporting the ecosystem, but you don't necessarily need a ton. So I am curious that when you've done that, first question, how quickly does it take to clear up and turn into kind of a balanced tank? And 2, have you tried reducing the lighting and still seen a similar ecosystem growth overall, like similar microorganisms and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I got one more question for you, Shrimp Cartel. I'm curious what substrate you're using. It can kind of impact that algae in the first 6 weeks, especially if you're using something like EcoComplete that is going to come with an oversaturation of fertilizer just floating as liquid in the bag. If you just dump EcoComplete into your tank and just add water, yeah, you're going to bloom algae like crazy. Like, I mean, I'm blown away about the quantity of nutrient that they put in EcoComplete. I drain it and I rinse it once before I put it in tanks. Just because I'm usually adding it to something that already has fish in it, which is ill-advised. But yeah, if you're setting something up brand new, my point to you, I guess, is that energy that is growing that algae is coming from somewhere, right? And so obviously, if you're growing visual algae, the light, Rick said is a fantastic point. Turn down the lights. You got nothing to be looking at in there anyway. So I mean, I do turn down the lights, but additionally, I tend to see big algae spikes when I'm using something that has kind of fertilizer in it. Additionally, there's really no reason to fertilize the tank kind of at this point. Even if you have live plants in there, super minimal. Like, I wouldn't be trying to do an EI dosing regimen of, strong fertilizers with heavy water change during a cycle. You're kind of asking for algae because algae kind of thrive in those cracks of distability, right? So when you have issues of different nutrient proportions, algae are what are going to kind of fill the gap. And with EI dosing, you're absolutely going to create gaps. It's just kind of I love EI dosing, although I'm not talking crap about EI dosing, but you will wind up creating imbalances.
Yeah, saying that lights are set to about 10 hours, using fluval in all tanks. So definitely a lot of nutrients. I don't know what kind of plant setup you have. So having more floating plants initially, having more fast growing plants might be a good option, or having a greater diversity of plants throughout that time could be really beneficial to just prevent some ugly algae growth. But to some degree, it is expected and perfectly fine as long as it does start to go away, kind of as the tank matures even more. But I appreciate you pointing that out, sharing your experience. That's awesome. So moving on, we'll of course continue to be monitoring the chat, answer any question you guys have. But I wanted to discuss a little bit more about substrate depth, because we did go into it a bit in the video, but there were quite a few things that I decided to cut just because they did get a little bit complicated. And so, Adam, you actually were the one who most recently watched the video earlier today, or listened to it. And so, do you remember how like much I did cut of like the concerns with ammonia spikes, deeper substrates, and like substrate depth?
Yeah, we cut a whole bunch. I mean, we probably.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk.
I
So
mean, this was
trust me.
like a 6 hour, yeah, discussion. So it was crazy.
We probably talked about it for 30 minutes, and I think we probably got a minute or two out of it. So
I know.
there's a bunch of information that pertains to kind of what you're talking about that we cut out, and I think that's all relevant. Like, I'm in full support of editing it for beginners. So I definitely think deep substrate beds is a more complex and also niche topic than people want to give it credit for. I've seen that, it's funny the UGFs are coming back. It seems, and coming back is kind of like relative to what your, realm of the internet looks like, but
Mhm.
it seems like deep substrate beds, deep substrate beds, excuse me, are also coming back. And they were popular probably 7 years ago. Like, that's kind of the height of popularity, I think, for those. Kind of a few key people on YouTube really pushed for those. And I mean, I have all sorts of opinions on them. What do you want to jump into first?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it would be good to start off with a basic overview of like the benefits of a thinner or substrate versus a thicker substrate, and kind of why a substrate is needed at all. I mean, so we did kind of cover that in the video, but it can't hurt to kind of go over that and then delve into it more and see where we go
Totally.
from there. So when we're thinking about just no substrate versus some substrate, the biggest effect here, or the biggest impact that a substrate has, is just adding more surface area. The small, like all of those little pebbles, grains of sand, all of those little balls of clay substrate with your fluvial stratum, your Amazonia ADA, those are all adding a ton more surface area for bacteria to grow on, which then, as water's flowing past them, they are pulling out nutrients and keeping the water clean. Your shrimp are also taking advantage of all that bacteria, or all that surface area for the biofilm that grows on it. And so, having the more substrate you have that's exposed to water flow and exposed to your shrimp, the more food they're going to be getting, the more stable the ecosystem in general. Now, a thinner substrate is going to be nicer because it's cheaper for one, and then you like don't really have to worry about stirring it up. When you up a deeper substrate, then you are more likely throwing up some bacteria that are kind of that they are very healthy to an ecosystem when they are stuck in the substrate and deep and not like accessible to the water column. But as soon as they get into the water column, they can cause some disease, and some infection. So with a thinner substrate, you are going to have more flexibility because you can disturb it and it's not going to be a big problem for your tank at all. With thicker substrates, you are more likely to you can get better root systems, which means better ecosystem stability. You can also grow a wider variety of plants in it in general. And you just you don't necessarily want to move them around too much because disturbing it can cause a problem. What did I miss there, Adam?
Nothing. I mean, I think you covered it really good. Do you want to talk a little bit about I guess the topic of deep substrate beds in general?
I mean, sure. What about it? Which
So,
part?
out of curiosity, do you believe in the fostering of denitrifying bacteria with the concept in our actual aquariums of, deep substrate beds?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some research about like anoxic zones that do allow for denitrification. I think it was there's a video from Fishery, Alex Williamson, who he talked about how the like clay balls that a lot of the active substrate is made out of. There's actually a study that showed that the like middle of them kind of has some anoxic areas where denitrification and anaerobic like activity can happen. But I'm not that familiar with denitrification as a process. So do you want to enlighten me?
I mean, I'm no
Okay.
no chemist. I mean, I do kind
What
of
do you
have a
know?
fundamental understanding. I mean, obviously it's a different subset of actual bacteria. They're different species of bacteria,
Hmm.
and they thrive in those environments like you're talking about that have low or no oxygen, and they thrive in those environments because they're still doing work, and their method of creating oxygen is, instead of pulling it from the fluid surrounding them, they create it by breaking the bonds of nitrate to just consume that oxygen, which then releases, nitrogen gas, which is kind of the denitrifying part of the much broader nitrogen cycle. A clarifying point, and I know you already know this, and probably everybody on here knows it, but I'll just say it: the nitrogen cycle in, human, earthly biology, or I don't know, universal chemistry, the general nitrogen cycle is much bigger than the part we look at in our fish tanks. We are looking at probably, I don't know, 1/3 of the actual, of the full circle of the nitrogen cycle. We are really looking at the nitrification process, where our start of the nitrogen cycle is ammonia. And I mean, you can start a cycle of a circle anywhere. So we'll start there, and we'll go all the way around through nitrification until we wind up with nitrate. And in nature, that's just another part of a big circle. So then something else is going to take that and denitrify that, where we're going to convert it back to, nitrogen gas primarily. And then you need to nitrogen fix that again through ammonification, and then you'll make it into something that can break it down again. So I oversimplified that even. There's probably people out there that are pulling their hair out going, this guy's an idiot. But, we're focusing on just one part of it. And so, if you can pull up a kind of a good diagram of the real nitrogen cycle, usually there's a cow in there's a lightning bolt, and we're talking about ammonification. They got a horse in this one. Find one.
Yeah, that's pretty cute. Oh,
I like the one with cows in them. There's got to be one with a cow on here.
There we go. Yeah.
There's my cow with a lightning bolt. That's what we're looking for. Yeah. So, their circle goes the other way. So everything I said about this way, you're going to want to go the other way, and you'll get the whole idea there. So, of course, we're really just looking down here at the bottom part, and I guess they're calling it about, I don't know, half of it. I was right. It's about a third. We'll call it a third of the circle. And the idea, I guess, about a deep substrate bed is that it can create such zones in it that can contain that bacteria that can then colonize all that surface area, that is happy to be, oxygen free, and it will do the denitrifying for you. It will produce nitrogen gas, which is just off gas to the atmosphere, and it will actually, over time, reduce your nitrate, which is a pretty cool concept, in my opinion.
It's cool. My understanding is that it does not happen to any meaningful degree in our tanks, right?
Correct.
Even if you have that's like anoxic zone, some deep bed, it's not going to have that much of an impact on your nitrates, right? Compared to like plants soaking it up.
Yeah, and so Scholars Retreat jumped in here and he said, he was crazy into the deep bed movement, learned a bunch from it, but, really enjoys slimmer, gravelly substrate, 1.5 inches. It's kind of perfect, once it's deep with mulm. I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I've done the whole, I kind of got into it too. Like, I kind of called it this niche thing from a long time ago. I guess, to me, I'm biased saying it's 7 years ago. That's when I got into it, right? And so I probably, the most I ever did was probably like 8 or 10 inches of substrate. Mm-hmm. And 10 inches of substrate, like, all right, you're getting pretty deep there.
That's a lot. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, yeah. And that was on like a 2-foot tall tank. That was kind of a unique tank, a really tall tank made for, I guess, that kind of thing. But I had, I had success. It was cool. I learned a bunch. Was there anything meaningful where I felt like it, replaced the necessity of water changes? Absolutely not. And, furthermore, I see lots of kind of anecdotal evidence towards the contrary, right? Where, I mean, I watched an interesting video about this not too long ago, probably yesterday night, with somebody kind of diving through their anecdotal experience of keeping a 220 with 6 or 8 inches of substrate in it, and the fact that they've done no water changes in years, and their nitrate, and they constantly feed it, and they got pretty big fish in there, and their nitrate stays under 20. It's interesting. It's anecdotal. It's possible. And on the flip side, by 125, I had kind of a similar thing going on. Like, I had a 125, didn't do water changes for a long time. Maybe not 0 water changes for years, but pretty much just topping it off, if anything. And I don't know. I mean, the nitrate never skyrocketed. Sometimes I wonder if we overestimate the amount of nitrate we think we're adding to a tank. If we're adding, higher density energy into the tank that isn't super high protein, you might not actually be creating the total amount of nitrate at the end of the cycle that you think you are. I don't know. I'm hearing a little bit of static, Rick. Are you able to hear that on your end?
I think it might be the filters. Yeah, I can try to see if I can mute it or fix it. Let's see.
No worries. And people out there in the chat, maybe you can let me know if I'm crazy. I was just hearing that on my end. Maybe it's possible it is just on my end. Um, but yeah, if you're in the chat, let us know if you were hearing a little buzzing there. Yeah, MD Fish Tank shout out. Yep, the classics.
Okay, does that sound any different?
Yeah, it sounds pretty clear in the background now. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just have to remember to turn the filters on before
I'll
I
try to
leave here
remind you.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So I kind of monologued there for too long. Jump in here. What are your thoughts?
Let's see. So my main question, I guess, is that I just don't know when you actually get the benefits of the deep substrates. Like, how deep does the substrate have to be to get the benefits? Because it does make sense that having some of those deeper layers may allow for sort of not just the nitrogen cycle, but other nutrient cycles to occur that maybe can't occur on a thinner substrate. And so it's, yeah, I do wonder if that can help stability, but maybe going to a 6 to 8 inch substrate is a little extreme. I don't know actually like the full science behind that, but you certainly don't need that thick of a substrate to keep a healthy tank. It might help you keep a lower maintenance tank though. Do you know anything about the science, like about the actual depth needed?
From when I was into it, what was kind of thrown around was the minimum that people would say that you'd get benefit at was about 3 inches, where a lot of people kept in that range of like kind of like 3.5 to 5.5 inches range in there. So 8 to 10 was far above and beyond what I think a lot of people were doing it. And I mean, I think it's cool. I don't think it was super meaningful. Like I don't think it actually participates in a large quantity of nitrate removal. But I mean, if you're out there and you have a bunch of deep substrate, like don't go just get rid of half of it because, like, I don't know, it's sort of unnecessary to me. I would never recommend a beginner start with a deep substrate bed. I think that 1.5 inches and get it real seasoned and just get a really mature tank. That 1.5 inch of substrate is pretty good rule of thumb. There's plenty of tanks I have where I do no substrate at all. I have tons of success. There's tanks where I have, just the very bottom most is covered just to give you some substrate, just to give some surface area for shrimp to hold on to and, add some more surface area in there. But, I mean, I think it's cool. And to each their own. I don't really believe in the fact that it's actually doing much. And there is some literature out there to back up the idea that it's not doing a whole awful lot, primarily due to the problem of, and I wish I was better with my chemistry. In my understanding, it's the carbon breaking down that was going to fuel part of this cycle. Obviously, there's no photosynthesis at that point. So for these bacteria colonies to, expand meaningfully, they need actually pretty large carbon reserves. And so in the studies that I've seen, they use stuff like corn husks and sort of like rice stalk, like bamboo shoots and rice stalks, where they kind of shred a bunch of cellulose and create a bunch of just carbon sources under these really, these are science laboratories where they're doing 2 or 3 foot beds of substrates, kind of in 55-gallon barrels. And they measured it over the course of 2.5 years in a 55-gallon drums with 2 feet of substrate, chocked full of cellulose, ridiculous amount. Like, I mean, 2 feet of corn husks. Like, who has that much carbon underneath there? Like, it's just not how we do it in the hobby. And even in those cases, it was, I mean, not a meaningless amount. Like, it was measurable and it was doing something, and they actually had to add nitrate to keep it fed, to keep it going.
Okay.
But compared to the nitrate that I see in tanks, useless. Like, not something we can actually really replicate. And if you look back and kind of read through some of the hobbyist versions of how people did it, a lot of the older guys that were doing it were very, go collect sticks and twigs and leaves and stuff like that and create a bottom of your tank with all this, from local riverways and water sources, and put all this kind of driftwood and plant botanicals and leaf litter, and then cover all that. And that would offer, I mean, that actually would give you a carbon source down there. So they may actually be able to have that carbon source, but 2.5 years is a pretty long runway, and it wasn't removing enough nitrate to actually prevent you from doing water changes. You'd be much better off with just heavily stocked planted tank with a low stock fish livestock, and you could achieve that, no water change dream a lot sooner.
I'd still be curious to know about like the other nutrients, if we're talking about phosphate or something, potassium, whatnot, that how that is cycling through that ecosystem rather than just focusing on the nitrogen. But yeah, I would guess that if it's not removing much if it's not removing much nitrogen, probably not removing much of the others as well, and having a serious impact. I was thinking about just what you were saying about how they were suggesting to get a bunch of additional like debris essentially put in your tank, whether that's the wood or leaves, whatnot, from local waterways. And I do think there's something to be said for having a kind of like having some wood or some leaves that does go through all the substrate layers. So like if you have I this tank here is probably about 2 to 3 inches, and I have a couple of leaves that are going like from the bottom to the top of the substrate and kind of sticking out. And so that creates a pathway here for other bacteria, for potentially some water to get down there as well, and open up. And it's like just, I don't know. Yeah, kind of manage traffic of the microorganisms going through there. Have you heard of any benefits to that?
Not really, nothing that I can really speak of to that effect. I mean, the only, I guess, version of that I do believe in would be loaches and trumpet snails that are going to actively be, I guess, in your kind of example, they're kind of creating their own pathways, literally physically burrowing through different stratums of your substrate. And as you go through the different layers of substrate, especially if you actually have different substrates at different layers, right? Like to those folks that do dirted tanks, or a lot of aquascapers are really big on aqua soil and then some gravels and then some sand, so that way they get the pretty sand on top, but they still get all the benefits for plants, yada yada. But I do think there's some benefit to having something that's going to controllably disturb those layers, whether that's just leaf litter that you manually do, or wood that is kind of set in place before the substrate. I think it's beneficial. I think the carbon in the substrate's helpful too. So like I've done a ton of substrates that have kind of leaf litter broken down and twigs and just like you said, kind of like junk just kind of put in there. Especially for long-term planted tanks, it will act as just it'll break down as well, and across 5 years of having that tank, it actually probably does benefit those plants notably in the long term. In the short term, you're not going to see much, but I'm a big fan. I think it's cool.
I do think adding some leaf litter and mixing that into the substrate is almost certainly beneficial. Yeah. Let's see here. So I feel like we've covered that topic pretty well. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop in. Let's see. Scholars Retreat is talking about biochar. Do you know much about biochar?
I don't. I'm curious what it is. Yeah, show me what you got.
Biochar. I think it's carbon-rich form of charcoal produced by baking organic materials in a low oxygen environment.
That's funny. I've made it. I just didn't know what it was called. That's funny. Yeah. So like I didn't know what it was called. Interesting. Yeah, I've made biochar before. So like you do it for. I'm a big fan of like camping and like kind of like survivalist camping, and so you can make what are called like fire bricks. If you make it, it is kind of biochar. You're going to make wood, and you're just going to kind of put it in fire, but you keep it encased in something, and it kind of creates basically pure carbon kind of inside of there, and it can have special benefits and helpful stuff. I've never added biochar to fish tanks or as soil amendments. It's interesting. I mean, it is. I mean, I kind of get the idea. Like, it makes sense on the carbon front. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I've never tried it. To be fair, I think there's some level of like you sort of you sort of do the best with the information you have at the time, and then you treat symptoms. And so I've never run into an issue where the solution was, oh, you need more carbon in your substrate. That'll fix all your problems. Like, in just the way that I've done it, that just hasn't been an issue. And if it was, I probably would have run into something like this a lot sooner. I'm curious, Scholars of Cheat, do you actively use it? Have you tested it? Have you played with it?
Yeah, I'd be really curious to hear that. I mean, if it does improve crop growth, I'd be curious if it does also could also be used to improve aquarium plant growth. But I just don't have any research on it. While we're waiting for them to respond here, do we want to? Let's see. So I was thinking about talking about keeping Neocaridina on an active substrate, and because I do think this is a very interesting topic, because I see this so often, and there are so many people on Facebook or Reddit where it's like, oh, that they post about having accidentally done this, and then a bunch of comments are like, it's the tank is ruined or something. Basically, just rip it out, throw out the substrate, and get some new stuff, get some inert substrate in there. That is an option, I suppose, but I have found that I've kept my first tank was fluval stratum that I kept Neocaridina on. I picked it because I wanted to have that like good plant growth that they claimed, and it does have quite a bit of nutrients in it. It did also drop the pH down to like 6 or so, and so what I did then immediately was I did some research. Again, this being my first tank, and I added some crushed coral to it, probably about a quarter cup or so, and just that was enough to bring up the pH to around 6.5 or so, which I would say is perfectly fine for Neocaridina, especially if you're getting imported shrimp. So those imports do tend to be kept in softer water, and so that's going to have lower pH, lower KH, lower GH, and they will be able to adapt to that a little bit better. I've had a couple other tanks where, so when I do add the crushed coral, you would expect it potentially to increase GH and KH drastically, and it does increase KH, but I don't know. So the GH did not seem to increase very much, and I'm not sure if plants were soaking up the excess or if the minerals just weren't making it into the water as much, but I didn't have a significant problem with that whatsoever. So I would say that's fluval stratum. If you can add something that does constantly release KH, then that does a great job of fighting the effects of your active substrate. And so what this does is, compared to root tabs, it does enable you to have nutrients just all throughout the tank. So you can have a good carpet, and it is still going to keep the pH low to some degree. And it seems like most aquarium plants like a lower pH. Well, a lot of the ones in the hobby, like mosses, do like a softer water overall. And so this substrate does help with that plant growth. So any like pH stress that shrimp might be getting is kind of offset by having a much like healthier environment with healthy plants and everything. So I find I get the best plant growth and the best overall performance of a tank. I get the best breeding with Neocaridina actually on my like active substrates. So it's very interesting. With that in mind here, the biggest danger that I wanted to talk about for active substrates is if you have, so if you're not paying attention to your KH and the buffering capacity starts to drop. So as the buffering capacity drops, the pH stability will drop. And if you don't have enough KH at that point, then you can run into a serious problem, pH swings, a bunch of issues. So it is very important to do regular water changes with that. One, because it will deplete the buffering of the substrate, and two, because it will maintain a consistent KH more so throughout the lifetime, and then you don't have to worry about any sort of crash that could wipe out your shrimp colony. But overall, it's very, very doable. Now, Uh, Adam, do you have any questions there? I'm curious. Have you ever tried keeping neos on active substrate?
Yeah, I have. I've actually never really done fluval stratum or biostratum, either of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have done like the ADA, Amazonia, like the V2 soils a bunch, mainly because I
Mm-hmm.
was doing them for Caradinia shrimp. And then I sold all the Caradinia shrimp, and then I had a tank there that was already established and cycled, and I just moved the water parameters to where I wanted them to be and did neos in them. And I mean, that's not really a great indication, right? Like, I didn't really set them up for this purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't really struggle. Like, they were fine. I wouldn't say they outcompeted my other tanks. In fact, I'd probably say my other tanks probably outcompeted them in terms of like production and, I mean, yeah, just total volume of shrimp that I was keeping in those tanks. But I mean, I I would make the case that if you don't own a fish tank or you don't own a shrimp tank, you want to get into shrimp keeping, and you just want to know what's the simplest path to repeatable success. I personally would tell that person just get an inert substrate, pick something pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, if they already had a tank or they were if really into aquascaping or they had like a specific vision it's funny, a buddy of mine who's not really a big fish keeper, we play video games together every now and then, although I don't play much video games anymore. He came to me and he was like, hey dude, I'm thinking about doing a fish tank. I was like, that's crazy, I love fish tanks, talk to me. And he like showed me this like AI rendering of a Japanese fishing village, hand painted model set with tree roots holding up the village, with like like an eel underneath it, and like rock piles and shrimp. What? Like, dude, this is wicked.
Okay.
And like, it's so cool. And I was talking to him about like the challenges that are going to be run into and the stocking and how to do it. And I guess he's had tanks in the past and never heard or talked to him about. And what kind of came about was like, okay, for the style that you're going and you want moss to grow up these kind of like, you're kind of bonsai treeing these roots to be what you want it to be. It kind of came up where I was like, you really actually should be shooting for something that you have an active substrate. And so I did recommend him, although I've never even used it. I recommend him the one you're talking about, where it's fluval stratum, just 'cause it's cheap and it's everywhere. Um, and it's like, if you want some of those prettier mosses, and that's your style, and you have a vision, drive towards the vision, right? Like, curate the ecosystem you want. Now, if I was talking to somebody who doesn't have that vision, they just think shrimp are cool and they don't really have anything right now, I think it's probably simpler to do an inert substrate. It's
Definitely.
more repeatable. And I guess the big thing I got in more into the hobby and invested in, the double fish room setup that I'm doing is for repeatability and standardization. And so to me, talking to kind of the broader audience of everybody in the world, I do think just saying, pick an inert substrate that you like, and then, I'd love it to be a just add water style conversation of we can create that level of repeatable success. And to do so, I think inert substrates add a variable. It's not multivariate. It's just a variable, but it's another
Mm-hmm.
variable that I think is probably unnecessary.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely wanted to challenge myself, and that was part of why I know that I did the research into water chemistry a little bit more. Felt I had a good grasp on what it might do. I was ready to buy crushed coral if I needed to buy it at that time. So, and it is definitely not as repeatable as you're saying because each batch is a little bit different. I think that first batch I got probably only dropped pH to around 6.3, maybe 6.0. I've got another batch that drops to 5.7, which is a pretty significant difference in those two batches. So it really does depend. I did want to go back, just mention like, if your top water is liquid rocks, that doesn't. I'd be very curious to know how much the active substrate's really doing there because I imagine it can. Yeah, if you're talking like 12 kh, I would guess it would slowly drop it over time. I suspect, but especially if you did a water change, it would be depleted pretty rapidly, and it doesn't really affect GH for the most part. So I don't know how much it solves. I would definitely argue that it doesn't solve water hardness issues if you do have them. Um, but it's all, yeah, that's just not its purpose. If you do have water hardness issues, I think it would be much better in general to go with a dilution using some RO water, some purified water, rather than trying to buy an active substrate that may introduce some other problems. So just something to think about there. Let's see. Yeah, I get. Oh, okay. So you just meant that. I see a comment here. Sorry, I'm saying hard, but I meant alkaline. And so, okay. In that case, then, yeah, that might be perfect. I do wonder what is causing that water to be quite so alkaline. If the KH is 6, what sort of bases are in the water there? But if you're having success with it, that's fantastic. I love to hear it. So we'll go ahead. We can talk a little bit more about the acclimation process here. I wanted to ask Adam and viewers, if you want to chime in, we'd love to hear you. Have you tested drip acclimation versus plop and drop with any of, say, the imported shrimp and compared what the actual results were? How many survived versus didn't?
Ooh, that's a good question. So across just Neocaridina shrimp, I guess the easiest numbers I have would be for, like, just thinking about red cherry shrimp. Different colors actually had different variability, and not due to the color, but rather probably due to the supplier quality.
Okay.
But reds that I was importing were from Taiwan. That was actually next day air delivery. That got them 200 to a bag, and 200 in a bag is kind of the upper threshold of where you can start having issues after the 1 day of air transport.
Okay.
And so they would come in a little bit of various states, which is unfortunate. And so I based my acclimation protocol based off of the condition of arrival. That said, to all of you listening out there that are going to buy in quantities of 10 or 20, maybe max of like 40 would be kind of crazy for most people of one color to put in a tank. I think you should drip acclimate. I think you should probably not think twice about it, especially if they're shrimp. The only reason that the plop and drop for shrimp would make sense is if the conditions of the bag are very, very poor. Like, you need to see deaths before it makes sense to switch methodology. And the numbers I have when I'd bring in, let's say I brought in 4,000 red Neos. And I do, in that same batch, I could do some one way, some the other way. I very quickly learned to not do plop and drop. Let's start there. So it wasn't worth risking, hundreds of dollars and hundreds of shrimp lives on picking the wrong method that was pretty quickly proven to be the wrong method. But when I was doing the testing originally, now mind you, I was probably, I don't know, I probably couldn't even drive. I was probably like 15. My dad had to pick up the fish at the airport. The problem wasn't immediate, and the problem was probably within the next 7 days. I probably saw neighborhood 50% die off of imported shrimp of plop and drop method, and I probably only saw 10 or 20% fallout for drip acclimated. And I've talked to some other importers, and they've seen pretty similar numbers. The best importers out there claim about that 5% attrition rate. I have doubts on that. But if that's true, that's good for you, and they're probably doing drip acclimation. To those of you that are hobbyists out there, drip acclimation for shrimp is just a good idea. And the reason, my understanding, and Rick, you probably have read more on it, so you can jump in here if I'm absolutely backwards on this, but my understanding is that shrimp don't have kidneys, and they osmoregulate primarily through their gills, which so do fish, but they also have glands towards their antennas that help that osmoregulation. Because the methodology has nothing to do with the kidney, they have a lower buffering capacity to osmoregulate, and so when you see differences in salinity, shrimp are going to be more acute to the rate of change. Whereas a guppy that has a kidney, although they still osmoregulate with their gills primarily, they have some level of buffering capacity built in. Additionally, the larger biomass of the fish compared to the shrimp is absolutely critical when you're talking about osmoregulation and kind of diffusion rates through equilibrium. It also, and all that means is that shrimp are more prone to issues with plop and drop than fish. So whenever I import fish, so like on this Friday, I have, a multi-$1,000 order of the nicest guppies in the world coming in. I'm super pumped.
Fantastic.
When I have those come in, I'm probably not going to drip acclimate anything. I might probably, if I do, it would be to shoot a YouTube video on how to do drip acclimation, and I'll pick whatever looks the happiest in the bag. Because for guppies, you're much more likely to have a super high ammonia situation, and you'll just ammonia burn them trying to drip acclimate them. So, for shrimp, if you're just talking shrimp, and that's kind of what the whole point of this is, for shrimp, definitely drip acclimate. They're more prone to osmoregulation issues of salinity differences in the water, and they probably produced less ammonia in the bag. Rick, you want to jump in there? What did I butcher on that?
I mean, so you told me a couple things that I didn't know. Well, I guess generally knew that shrimp maybe didn't have kidneys. I wasn't sure if that actually made them more prone to like osmoregulation issues. So what I've done a video kind of talking about this, and I do think part of it is just that, as you mentioned, that fish have a much larger biomass. I mean, they are denser overall, and they're generally going to be larger. So shrimp have to have more surface area that is potentially diffusing and is going to lead to faster changes in the salt content in their bodies. And what this does is, if you don't have the right salt content, it's going to impact the way all of your proteins and enzymes function in your body, which can be a serious problem. And if that's too sudden of a change, then things might stop working. Like maybe our brains rely on a careful balance of calcium and like signaling here. And so if we all of a sudden have a change in that, then the signals either might fire too much or not at all, and you have serious issues develop. So, yeah, I all in all, I agree completely with what you said. That osmoregulation is one of the biggest problems here, and any fast changes with plop and drop method, you are going to see issues. Now, that being said, imported shrimp are among the unhealthiest shrimp you could get, or the most stressed in that situation. And so they are also the most likely, or least likely, to handle any additional stress well. If you do have healthy shrimp, say that you are moving from one tank to another, that's where I would say that plop and drop is much more acceptable. Assuming that they are the same temperature, you should be able to move a shrimp from one tank to another of yours that you know is healthy again, and it should do just fine. Now, that does help because you're likely using similar types of water in those tanks, and so all of that does balance out. But if you are introducing new shrimp, that's where it is just always a good idea to use drip acclimation. Again, except in the rare circumstances that you do have a bunch of dead shrimp in the bag, you've got a bunch of ammonia buildup in there, and then it may be better to switch to the plop and drop method and hope. You might lose a few, but it shouldn't be an issue. I did actually just have a shipment of shrimp coming in, but it was only like 20 to 30, and I drip acclimated all of them, or one batch into here. I plop and dropped one batch into here, and I did see a single death in the plop and drop tank, but at the same time, I'm not actually sure if that was I did have a couple of shrimp in there before, and so don't know if that was one of those or not. So it's tough to say. But yeah, there's just no reason to take the risk, I would say, of plop and drop when you don't need to. I would guess for fish, for pretty much any animal, a drip acclimation, a slower acclimation is going to be better, right? Unless there's too much ammonia buildup in a shrimp shipment, in a fish shipment, which might happen. Do you know much? I haven't dug into like other animals acclimating like as much. I know that fish handle plop and drop fairly well. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue with drip acclimation, just to call it out there, and I'm pro drip acclimation for shrimp, the biggest issue it has is that those animals are going to experience a pretty legitimate pH swing pretty rapidly, even within the own bag that you're opening. And when that happens, whatever ammonium that has converted to ammonium will then convert to ammonia also very rapidly as that pH swings. And so it's very critical to use an ammonia binder when you're doing it. We've kind of talked about a couple different ones. I think we showed, ACCR or some other Fritz one. I like those. Those are what I use. It's what I recommend. But brand doesn't probably matter that much. I've used a couple of solid ammonia binders. I wouldn't recommend those. So there's gels that you can buy that do really work. They're actually better for nitrate than ammonia.
Are you talking like Purigen?
No, well, Pyrogen also sucks, but no, I'm talking about Dr. Tim's. He has a gel, like I think it's like nitrate, magic nitrate gel or whatever. Actually, funny enough, it actually does reduce nitrate. It does soak out nitrate, which can be useful to breeders. So I see people that still use it. I probably will use it when I roll really, really high concentration of nitrate, but it does you no good because there's not enough agitation of the water to touch the gel to remove it fast enough. You'll just kill everything, and then slowly it'll go away. Like, that's useless. Purigen is kind of similar because there's nothing to push the water and force it to touch it faster than it's going to touch the fish. You're just going to kill your fish and then slowly watch your ammonia go back down. Like,
certainly not in a bag that they're being shipped in.
correct.
Significant effect.
Old school, and it's funny, old school people that actually ship with Purigen in the bags. Totally useless. Yeah, unnecessary.
It's a cool idea. They're thinking on the right wavelength of caring for the fish. It's unfortunate that the marketing is just not very true, not very accurate.
Yeah, it's fine for filter media, although useless. It does its job in a filter when you push water through it. It's just not necessary for most cases. I guess I got one case. If we're gonna give Purigen a fair talk through here, those of you that are medicating and going through a quarantine process, specifically people that are going through a quarantine process where the particulate has issues being picked out by a carbon source, Purigen is actually using a slightly different mechanism for chemical filtration, and it is better on some medications. So specifically, it'll be your strong horse dewormers. So if you're going to use something like, what is it, fenbendazole or flubendazole, Purigen is pretty good at getting rid of that really quickly. So if you're going to dose medication and you have actually the one time I ever found it really useful, my 75, I had a problem and I got guppies in and they all had stringy poop because guppies that you import always have worms. And so I dosed pretty hard. I probably overdosed it a little bit, knowing that I needed to clear it because that fenbendazole, I think it's sold at Petco's dog dewormer, it works like a charm for guppies. It'll kill all of your snails dead like tomorrow. And
I don't know. My bladder snails handled them perfectly fine, to be honest.
I guess,
only a small percentage of them died off.
Interesting. These are mystery snails I was talking about back then. So I had mystery snails coming in from Florida like a couple days later, and so I was super worried about dosing it with something that's going to kill them and then putting them in there. And Purigen worked like a charm there and better than activated carbon. But as far as drip acclimation, it's useless. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Perfect. So I don't know if that discussion is too relevant for other normal shrimp keepers, so we'll leave it at that here. We did have a quick question in chat from Valerie Goldman 1262 about what makes a good guppy versus a bad guppy. Now, I'm guessing that this could get you off on an hour-long tangent here, Adam. So I would like you to try to answer this question in 1 minute or less. I'm going to set a timer now. Okay?
Ooh, I'm ready. I like it.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, a good guppy is one that looks happy, and a bad guppy is one that looks sad. No, it's totally up to you. I mean, there's not like a good guppy or bad. I mean, to
You're
me,
talking
a
about
bad
appearance, like coloration and everything, though, right?
I would say a bad guppy is one that is sick, that is not healthy, malnutrition, has worms, has fungus. That's a bad guppy. It's sick, right? It's just sick. As far as appearance goes, pick what you like. When I was saying I'm bringing in really nice ones, they're certified strains that have heritage and lineage that's built out, so we know how the genetics have moved and transitioned. That way I can do genetic development work and find very cool stuff with patterns and body shapes and fin shapes, and I can create new strains from them because I'm starting with kind of a known entity, I guess.
So I can't wait to see what you have. Yeah, we've got 8 seconds left.
Get guppies. They're really cool. Guppies are awesome. Guppies are awesome. All right, go for it.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see what you get. And I mean, you're inspiring me to keep them with shrimp. I know you've talked about how, again, there are many strains that are, I mean, in general, they're pretty harmless to shrimp, but there are a couple of strains that are even worse hunters in general, as you said. And so your shrimp are very safe because they're basically blind. So that's perfect. But
Yep.
obviously,
And
concerning from a animal like care perspective. But yeah.
different point, so it doesn't count to the 1 minute. However, I
Uh-huh.
actually got guppies here. It's the fish that I'm bringing in because I brought all my guppies over from my dad's house that way I can quarantine everything together. And I brought them all over, and I randomly came in this morning and there's babies in the fish room, and it's just cool. Like we got fries in there.
Awesome.
And my roommate had his whole family over. He's buying a new bed, so their whole family came over, and they got, his like I guess his like 7-year-old sister's running around. The first thing she does is she's like baby fish, and it's like yeah.
That's
I know.
awesome.
They're wicked.
Yeah, I need to figure out a better way of getting my guests engaged. I need to bring more people, or maybe I need more like. No, never mind. I'm not gonna go that way.
Guppies.
Yeah. I do need more guppies, I guess. But figuring out how to get like other people, visitors, really engaged in the shrimp tank is something that I need to try to do more. I don't know if it's just like, once they actually do look into it, then it becomes interesting, but it's maybe not as visually apparent as fish tanks. So there's definitely some benefits to fish tanks as well. One guy so Iceberg the Dragon mentions have been having a hard time sourcing a calcium test. Are there any sorts of signs of too much calcium in the water before it gets to the point of failed molts? And so it depends on why you're worried about. It's like, how likely is it that too much calcium is building up in your water? Are you adding calcium supplements to it? If so, then doing more consistent water changes is going to be a good way of just balancing it out, bringing it back to whatever the natural tap water or your water source is. Assuming you don't have, if you're not adding extra sources of calcium, then I really wouldn't worry about like excess building up. And I wouldn't say that many people need a calcium test in the most part for most circumstances, assuming your shrimp are molting well and your snails have good shells, like shell health overall. Then those are good indicators that you've got enough calcium in the tank and not too much. Again, if your shrimp are molting well. Let's see. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, if you could you look something up to display it there? If you could look
Sure.
up low magnesium or magnesium deficiency in aquarium plants. So this is the cheap man, the poor man's solution to the calcium conversation. GH test kits are generally a lot more common. Like GH and KH come in kind of the common test kits that you'll see. And so especially, I think Iceberg, you told me you're living up kind of further away from the U.S. I forget. I think you said Scandinavia or said
I think
something
Scotland, right?
Okay.
Unless I'm
Way
getting
out there.
confused. Yeah, Scotland.
I don't know, not America. I'm just kidding. You're out there, and so you probably do have access to GH and KH test kits. The GH is going to tell you your total general hardness, which is going to incorporate both calcium and magnesium as kind of your primary sources of GH. And so if you can identify that your tank has a magnesium issue, so you'll see it especially on broadleaf plants. I like that second picture. That's kind of what I look for.
Like this?
Yep. Yeah. If you
Okay.
see the veins in like an anubias, like especially like a cophifolia, it'll be more obvious in something that has those structures. You can actually identify low magnesium pretty quickly with planted tanks. And if your GH, let's say you have a GH of, I don't know, 8, so totally reasonable for Neocaridina shrimp, and you see pretty severe magnesium issues, it's fair enough to say that you probably have the wrong ratio of calcium to magnesium. It's not totally bona fide. It's not completely scientific. There are other variables that it could be, but by the most likelihood is that if you are seeing magnesium plant deficiencies and your GH looks pretty typical, you probably have too much calcium. So I think that might be a cheap way for you to try to find that.
Well, they just commented saying that their snails are actually starting to form a lot of white areas around their shells. And so that's a sign of almost the opposite problem, right?
Correct.
Where you've got a little bit of a calcium deficiency. Because then, the snails are just not able to form their shell. So that's where adding some sort of calcium supplement may actually be beneficial. And again, assuming you're not adding way too much and assuming you are doing at least periodic water changes, that calcium isn't going to build up to such an extent where it would start to harm the likelihood of like shrimp molting. And let's see, they do also say they see veins in Bacopa plants, but not Anubias. Bacopas are fast grow. I mean, they grow faster than Anubias, right? So that
Yeah,
might explain it.
they'll grow a little faster. But copa also kind of have a different, complete different leaf structure, so they're not totally comparable. I guess I am when I'm looking for plant deficiencies to outline water parameter issue. I'm looking for new growth, obviously, on slow growing plants actually. So new growth on fast growing plants, although it sounds like it would be the canary in the coal mine, I tend to see that fast growing plants throw weirder problems, I guess, like sort of they're not a good canary in the coal mine. It gives you false positives, I guess I'd say.
Okay.
You can have other confounding issues. Whereas if you're seeing Anubias that kind of show those pretty typical signs of magnesium deficiencies, I mean, it's not a lot of different things that cause it. And, people that are big into plants can look at a plant and immediately say, oh, yeah, you need to add a little bit of this, add a little bit of that, just like gardeners do, but for live aquarium plants. And so it's that kind of that second picture on this one that I keep looking at. You're looking for that kind of a whitening of the actual leaf with a heightened darkening of all of that veiny structure. If you're seeing, and it's the whitening that matters, not that you're seeing veins. Some plants have vein, right? Like ferns have thick veins, and that's just the way they look. But if you're looking at a big broadleaf plant and you're seeing kind of those, the whole thing is looking much more whitish and not yellowing, but kind of more translucent, or it's losing its green. It's that magnesium deficiency is causing the chlorophyll issue.
Okay. Interesting. I
But
think I
you're
may
right.
need to have you look at my tank and see if there are any deficiencies. Some of my plant growth is not as not quite what I would hope for. So we'll get there though.
I'm not any plant wizard. I've
I mean,
played with plants.
you are. I mean, it's not. What was it? You said that you have grown like 100 and some different plant species to get some certification, right?
Yeah, they did it was the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society did the Master Aquatic Horticulturist thing. They might
Yeah.
still do it, I don't know. But you have to you effectively need to propagate, so actually grow it yourself and produce more of something uh, by a certain quantity of different species. So I don't remember what the final number was, but you're right. Yeah, it's like 150 or 200 or whatever it was of different species, and you could have all the variations, like all the different Anubiases count for 30 of them or something. But that means you got to go find 30 different Anubias plants. So good luck on that, nerd. But it's it takes like 6 years if you're really trying to do it with a normal amount of fish tanks. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. I mean, I learned a bunch, but yeah, the pits, the pits and shells indicating lack of calcium. The
Well, actually, he's clarifying that they are clarifying that pits and shells indicate a lack of calcium, whereas extra white areas indicate excess. I haven't actually heard that. Have you?
the certain extra white areas indicate
Hmm.
excess calcium. I guess it might depend on species. I haven't seen that, and my calcium from tap is ridiculous. But yeah, I haven't seen. I mean, I wonder how absurd, like, on that, graph of calcium ratio to magnesium, what ratio do you start seeing literal buildup of calcium deposits on the snail? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm taking a quick look here. Let's see. Some of it's saying that there's potentially some shell erosion due to lower pH or softer water. But that's a very quick look. I'm guessing you've already done this is similar research here. So continue checking out. We're not. I guess are not quite as certain about the excess white areas there. But let's see. Actually, one more thing I wanted to share.
And one more
Go.
thing to note. I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that they're in Scotland. I for some reason I read Scandinavian, so I'm thinking they're, you know, Viking tribe way up out there. But hey, if you're in Scotland, I mean, you're close enough to civilization. You should be able to find online sources to ship you some kind of calcium test. They, in at least in America, in our area, they are pretty common. You can buy them. They're not absorbently expensive, and so I mean, not needed by any means for the general beginner, it's fair to worry a lot too. Like I get that. I'm curious, are
Yeah.
you using remineralized water or are you utilizing tap water?
I'm
Um,
guessing they have to be using tap water. They talked about how it gets like some water gets or like alkaline water stuff gets added to their water uh, to make it less acidic. But
mhm.
yeah, I mean, so for my advice for you, if you just got your shrimp, I'd be looking for to see if you can see any like new molts in the next week. I would guess that they're adapting to the water, and if so, once you're starting to see that, that's generally a good sign that they are adapting. And now, once you see the like second round of molts in about a month or so, that's where you could feel really comfortable of just not like knowing that they have been in your water for an entire molt cycle. They've got what they need. But if you, what we are what we do think here is that you might have a little bit actually of a calcium deficiency, and so you may want to consider some mineral supplementation, potentially both calcium and magnesium, which might help your plant growth as well. But yeah, do a little bit more research here and make sure that that aligned with what you find online as well to just verify.
Yep.
So,
And just to note, just to say it
mhm,
out loud because we have to, tap water, these kinds of questions, these kinds of thought processes are going to be common with tap water.
yeah,
I'll get off the soapbox real quick on that one. But if you want to stop thinking about it, find a way to do remineralized water. It might just be the key.
yeah. Okay. Oh, and they just said that they've had 15 for a few months that are molting and breeding. If it's that same water, so again, the first week or so, that would be where they potentially might have the ones that have trouble adapting are not going to do well. But you clearly do have water that can support shrimp. So
Totally.
I wouldn't
Yep.
worry about this too much at all.
Yep. I
Now,
agree. Once you see success, that's the stick to measure by.
yep. Now, last thing here, problems with imported shrimp. So Adam has covered he covered a lot of that in the last video, but I wanted to just add kind of an interesting point to it. And so I'm going to go and give you guys a sneak peek of one of our later slides here where we're talking about issues that you might experience with your shrimp. And so what this is pulled from a study about various epibionts that are on Neocaridina. And
Do you
so,
wanna do you wanna present this slide? Just go to slideshow present.
oh wait, do I
Sorry,
not
it's
have it?
gonna.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Sorry, it's just kind
the
of
full
small
screen.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course.
Love it.
Okay, so if you haven't seen some of my videos, epibionts are basically any organism that lives on your shrimp. It may be beneficial, it may have no effect on the shrimp, or it may be harmful. And so something like Cladogonium here, whoops, forgot about that. Something like Cladogonium is your parasitic algae, and so that's a serious issue. Something like Monodiscus kumaki, Scuturiella, Holtodrillis, they live on your shrimp. They don't necessarily look very good. They're kind of like white worms that can be on various parts of them, but they don't have a significant impact on their overall health. They just can scare people. Now, what they did in this study is they looked at wild caught. They looked at ones pulled from aquaculture, so like the places that imported shrimp are bred, and then they looked at aquaria, so like hobbyists, where hobbyists keeping shrimp in their tanks. And so, what I want you to look at here is aquaculture versus aquaria numbers. So, Cladogonium, one of the worst like possible things you can deal with because it can like kill your shrimp eventually. It's very annoying to deal with. It can stick around for a long time in an individual. And in aquaculture, they found that nearly 54% of females at the time of this study had some form, like some growth of clado. Compare that to aquaria, where you've got 5.1%. Now, for monodiscus, you've got almost 72% of females that were being grown in the sample had monodiscus, compared to 30% in aquaria. So it is more common there, but it's not as obvious, and they're generally going to be fewer. Scuturiella, 48% in aquaculture versus 12%. Holtotrilla, 61%. These other ones are not as big of an issue here, so we're not going to deal with or talk about them. But you can see just how big of a difference the where these shrimp come from has on how likely you are to get some sort of epibiont and something that you may or may not have to deal with. Clado you have to deal with. Monodiscus scuderiella, not as big an issue, but many people still want to deal with that, and that's not something that you would enjoy doing when you get your shrimp. And they're also going to be imported, they're going to be stressed, and so trying to treat them with salt dips and hydrogen peroxide treatments, it just adds to that stress and creates an even bigger issue. So, let's see, going back to chat here. Adam, did you want to add in anything here as well about like disease and whatnot for imports?
Yeah, could you go back to full screen on that one? I guess I got one.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess the comment I want to throw in here, this is speaking in generalities, which can be dangerous, but in general, aquaculture seems to experience higher concentrations than even the wild would. And so this is really non-scientific, but generally aquaculture is more contaminated than the wild species, in this study at least. And generally aquaria is less than the wild. So you'll see healthier is definitely true on the clado side, but they are definitely less contaminated with these species in aquaria as it compares to aquaculture. And so when we start looking at trends of, I'm talking specifically here in the United States, what it looks like for the supply chain of Neocaridina shrimp, which sounds like a very, big shrimp, kind of thing. But the supply chain's not that convoluted. It's pretty straightforward. It is a shocking percentage of and quantity of shrimp that we import here. And it's most, by far. It's not even close. Probably 100 to 1 compared to how many actually get bred here. To the rate where these large-scale industrial 100,000-gallon-plus farms, multiple of them overseas, just focus on Neocaridina shrimp because that's what's profitable to them. To me, it is a pretty clear indication of, just another drop in the bucket in my eyes as to another reason to avoid imported shrimp. But I do understand. I kind of come from the bias of I did it for 5 years. I was the importer, and I saw the carnage, and talked to the other people doing it and learned how to do it. And I guess I saw how the sausage is made a little bit and peered over their side and hated it. So I am more biased against it probably than I should be. But this study, I'm uninvolved in it, not surprised at all, and matches everything I've ever seen.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, it's very common. Iceberg the Dragon asked a good question about if there's a difference between where imports are sourced from, like from Taiwan versus Indonesia. Did you have a good idea of what country the imports were coming from, at least? I know you said that, what specific farms was kind of hard to track down, but the country is a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, so usually you do know country of origin simply because you have to, at least in the U.S., to identify where it's getting imported from for customs. And so you'll know where it's coming from. There can be some confusion, especially with adjacent land-based countries where there's some question. But yeah, usually you know what country it's coming from, and you usually know where the farms are. You might not know exactly what farm, you might not have an address, but you can get pretty close. Taiwan, just to call it out, Taiwan has by far way more shrimp farms than Indonesia. It's not even close. It's, 10 to 1. There's not as many Indonesian farms. Indonesian shrimp are, generally speaking, at high production volumes, a lower quality shrimp. So you will see poorer coloration across the whole animal. They generally have more cutting edge colors, but when you're looking at that kind of selection, that can be super appealing, but their genetics aren't nearly as bona fide as the Taiwan breeders. So I don't see it as really valuable to get, wow, look at this kind of new thing, when the genetics aren't going to keep that as a purebred line anyways. The big differences to me, by the way, just to call them out really quick, between Taiwan and Indonesian, Taiwan shrimp, that's where I imported from the most. Higher quality, they tend to, and it depends on farm, but in Taiwan, being it's kind of, I mean, depends on the farm, but they tend to be rainwater specific, and they tend to use rainwater cut with a little bit of seawater is how they mix to get their remineralized water. And so they tend to be extremely soft water shrimp coming out of Taiwan. Not that they can't be soft water shrimp coming from Indonesia, but Indonesia, I notice a fair bit more kind of tap water wherever their local, municipality water supply is. Whereas in Taiwan, they're very big on using rainwater solutions and, cutting it with seawater. It's not true of every farm by any means. It's a hyper generalization. I get that there's some issue in doing so in a public setting like this, but yeah, if you had to pick between the two, take Taiwan every day, and just know that they're going to come in probably expecting a pretty low a GH. You're going to want, I'd target probably. I mean, this is probably useless information for most people, but if you're actually importing them, shoot for like a 3 GH and probably a 3 KH. So kind of a weird mix to come in on. And I would run CO2 in it and try to pull that pH into like the low sixes.
Yeah, I mean that's where the active substrate may work really well to just make sure things stay soft for the pH. Because I suspect the pH might be more important than the GH and KH there. I mean,
Sure.
obviously minerals are important, but the shrimp can adjust to the osmotic pressure to quite a pretty good degree. But they may have been bred in these low pH conditions for many generations, and so that might be something that's a little bit harder for them to adjust. But it's tough to say. I
Yeah.
know that there are just so many farms out there, so many different shrimp as well.
I guess I have a note about
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the osmotic pressure. They are accepting pretty big swings in that. However, if you are going to import, the reason why you don't keep substrate is that it's impossible to catch a high volume of shrimp out of tanks
Sure.
with substrate in them. And so usually importers won't keep, you'll notice people don't keep substrate in the tanks that import. Or it'll be kind of sand or something that can kind of filter through the net, so you can just scoop whatever you're in there and it'll just filter through. But usually they still want high TDS. So you're looking, in my experience, I shot for about 600 TDS, but only 3 GH, which is sort
What?
of a pain in the butt to do, just to call it out there. But,
You found that they did well at 600 TDS.
Correct.
How much experimentation did you do for this?
Years worth, a lot, yeah, quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I just can't even imagine landing on super soft water like that and then a really high TDS. Huh.
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
to me, my understanding, and this was talking to the farm, it was really difficult to get them to give me any parameters, and they really wouldn't give me GH parameters. I had to pull that from the actual shipped water.
Okay.
But I found that was kind of the target, was real low GH for me at least. But it's because I think the cutting water with seawater, the seawater has a ton of NaCl in it, and that sodium chloride is going to, in my understanding, it's going to impact your TDS to a pretty extreme extent, but it's not going to add a ton of GH. So, yeah, I'm curious to see what the internet's got on that one.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, yeah, I did. So mostly chloride, sodium, and so for them to get a reasonable amount of magnesium and calcium in the water, looks like they would have to use quite a bit of it. They'd have to have a lot of chloride and sodium there. Interesting.
Yeah, and
Does
so
make sense.
those don't really touch your GH as much. So you're just creating fake TDS, but you're creating osmotic pressure to try to match what they came from in true importing fashion. I think there's some good questions in here if we want to go back to those. And I got kind of off on a tangent. Sorry, guys.
Let's see. What kind of
There's
questions?
some discussion about RO systems a little earlier.
Oh, sure. In the chat. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
see. Yeah, there are a couple of people asking, talking about how difficult an RO system actually is to set up. Looks like JD Christopher actually has like a reservoir and a pump that can pump in water into their tanks, which sounds amazing. Let's see. But yeah, simple plumbing. I don't know. I'm not seeing too many other questions here. But yeah, we can obviously. When are you releasing your video about like RO water and like RODI systems?
It's a good question because I haven't filmed it.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought
I
you were talking
should.
about it before.
I have like I have some filming done for it, but I haven't done the big bulk like I guess the walkthrough and the how-to side. I did a little bit of unboxing. I did a little bit of construction of putting the the RODI unit together. A little bit of troubleshooting with TDS stuff just to get it on and working, but I didn't do like a full walkthrough, and I definitely haven't done any tips and tricks like I'd like to. Um,
Hmm.
I think RODI units are totally the solution. I mean, if you're serious into it, where you have multiple tanks and you already have that investment and you're invested into the hobby at least emotionally, like you're something you want to do more of.
Yeah.
I think remineralized water is a no-brainer, and RODI is kind of the best solution for it. Um, but onto the sodium chloride conversation for just a second. My water actually is softened upstream, so the incoming water is
Mm.
pre-softened from the home softener, and I
Okay.
could have picked either or, but it's actually better to have pre-softened water for the RO membrane efficiency itself. It does a little bit better with that because
Hmm.
it reduces the scale from the magnesium and the calcium it removes. So I picked to have pre-softened water in there, but the problem is then your byproduct of whatever TDS comes through the RO membrane is going to be primarily whatever it was coming into it. And so you'll get, sodium chloride in, you're going to get sodium chloride out. It's not a magic machine or anything. And so I have a 660 TDS line that comes in, which is almost pure sodium chloride and copper, which of course it's got copper,
Oh.
of
Yeah.
course. Um, and of course you'll have a little bit of magnesium and calcium, of course, but much higher NaCl, and it will still come out about 13 parts per million. And of that 13 parts per million, like it's almost all NaCl that's still in there. Like there's no registerable GH at that low of a TDS, anyways. But there's almost no calcium magnesium that's in there. So to those of you out there that are using pre-softened water, you will probably want DI stages on your RO. That's where you get like the RO DI, and those deionizers are what are going to soak up that NaCl instead of just outputting that, whatever that TDS is residual into your water. Unless your
Well,
TDS is so low, it doesn't matter.
I think the other stages typically are removing those ions from the water, right? And so the DI is more for the particles that don't have a charge, like NH3, or like ammonia, aren't
The
they?
DI is the deionizing stage, so it's the cation and anion resins,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
those are charged. So they are picking out the
Okay.
charged
Yeah,
ions.
yeah. I'm just completely misremembering. Okay.
No,
Cool.
you're all good.
Let's see. We got one more question from Iceberg the Dragon. By the way, we'll probably be wrapping this up pretty soon. Now is the time to get in those questions. I mean, I don't think we necessarily have anywhere we have to be. So if you do have any questions, now we'd love to hear them. But let's see. Iceberg the Dragon had a store near that got them from Taiwan. Had a massive outbreak of planaria in their tank when they went to get new stock. Are pests like that common for imports? Would you see planaria pretty often in the imported bags?
Not You won't see those in the import bags, but they're common to see in the hobby because they come in on live plants usually. So if
Hmm.
your fish store is importing live plants and displaying shrimp with plants, which most retail establishments will do that, they're probably not coming in on the imported shrimp themselves. I mean, they could, I guess, but very unlikely. Much more likely they're coming in on something else, and the shrimp are just giving them, more food, I guess, that they can establish on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the planaria outbreak, like, that sucks. It's probably a overfeeding issue. Plus, they came in on live plants. Is my best guess. And I used to supply local fish stores near me, the few stores north of me. Um, yeah, I mean, you'd run into that kind of issue because they're cycling out plants out of the same retail tank that my shrimp are in.
Hmm. Yeah, that is what I would imagine. Every so often, I'll see somebody post saying like, "Oh, this bag of shrimp came with a bunch of planaria in it," and it's just like, how did that even happen? How is the store employee or something just fishing out a bunch of planaria with their shrimp? They've got to have a lot in there, and I doubt that. But it's like, if you had a bunch of planaria in your breeding facility in your setup in a farm, like that would just not work. They would be hunting down the shrimp. There'd be a serious problem there. That would like probably affect their stock. So I imagine they treat for worms pretty almost immediately, or like periodically in their breeding setups. to just avoid that issue entirely. And then, yeah, the planaria gets introduced via plants to the store itself rather than from the imported shrimp specifically.
Yeah, I wonder about planaria outbreaks at the commercial scale. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I've run into them in my tanks, of course. I've never gotten to visit a Neocaridina shrimp farm, although it's still on my
Mm,
list. Although I'm anti-importer, I'd love to see it.
yeah. Let me
Um,
know when you go.
yeah, that would be really cool. I don't know. I'd imagine that they have some residual low levels amounts of that kind of stuff going on. Although it predates on stuff, it's sort of inefficient to have to shut down operations in order to treat them actively. Um, I mean,
I mean,
there's
the
not.
dewormers would be pretty simple treatments, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you're gonna. I mean, maybe. It touches other things in there that I would worry at a commercial scale that
Sure.
they're not going to want to just throw in dog dewormer and call it like I would. But I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe I
Yeah, tough to
could
say.
be.
But yeah, if you're getting any planaria in your shrimp shipment, I would be very concerned about the conditions of those shrimp. And I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that Iceberg the Dragon got some planaria with their shrimp, and that those did not make it. Probably not great. And greetings from Canada, ML99942. Thanks for joining in. We appreciate it. I still need to get to Canada at some point, especially want to go to Banff. Last thing here, we've got another question from them. Your favorite 3 commercial shrimp foods, Adam?
Well,
I feel
mean,
like you could put
both
green
have
beans on that list if you
Is
want
that
to.
commercial? Does that count?
I mean, you're
We
buying
both
them from cans, yeah?
we both know the number one, right?
Yeah.
Only every scientific study in the world's used it because thank you, Lucas R. Bretz. Um, yeah, number one is I mean your Tetra color granules are only the most old school solution to the question. They do really well. I mean, shrimp love that stuff. So if you haven't ever fed Tetra color granules and you can get your hands on them, I mean, it's sort of a no brainer.
I mean, anyone can get their hands on them. They're
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's
But
everywhere. So those are good. Other than that, cop out of an answer. Um, I like New Life Spectrum Foods all right, and so they have some sinking pellets that are really small that I can feel like shrimp can kind of run up to and kind of grab onto and run away with, which I like. Um, and then I really like Rapashi for shrimp. That's a commercial food. I mean, I'd prefer to feed green beans and zucchinis and you know eggs any day of the week. But when I'm not feeding real foods and I'm going whole foods from a jar or bag or can or whatever, Rapashi is pretty cool. So if you haven't played with that, it's kind of you can make it at home too. You don't need to buy Rapashi. You can make your own homemade gel food. It's just agar agar buy the pre-made gelatin, kind of like Jello, but obviously you want the unscented and unflavored kind, and you'll mix that with whatever kind of puree of base you want. So puree in a bunch of broccoli and green beans and spinach and a little bit of garlic is good, and throw in some protein in there if you want. But krill meal, but who wants that in the kitchen? Um, but
I
yeah,
guess that doesn't smell very good.
yeah, it does. I think that stuff does better for. It just stays. It has better nutrient solubility, is why I'd say that. So I don't need to go too into that, but I do like having the gel foods.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know you're doing a lot of research on it. I'd love to try out the gel foods at some point. For me, if I was answering that question, yeah, I mean, I do feed a lot of the tetracolor granules. The other thing I do like, I do think there's something to be said for shrimp envy food. So I do know the owner. He is all aims for like an all vegetarian line, and those veggie proteins, they don't pollute the water as much, and so they are a little bit safer to feed. They also are, yeah, I suspect he's using more whole ingredients rather than the like extremely commercialized and like even Tetracolor is one example where they're going to probably be using the cheapest versions available, and that could have some downsides, or it can pollute the tank water if you're not careful. Other than that, I don't know. I would say the powdered foods is where I would go to next. Something like Bacter AE. While I haven't done the experiments that I really would like to be able to say like this Bacter AE versus some other powdered food is better. It does seem like that's beneficial overall to have at least some powdered food and something that's a little bit of a different variety there. Like it does have some like what is it, like yeast? I forget. in it that can be beneficial and just provide a different type of microorganism for your tank that's beneficial. Let's see. We've got one other question here. Do you have any experience dealing with leeches in the hobby? I've heard they're a bit of a nightmare. Adam, I know you have. Want to cover that pretty quickly here?
Yeah. Stop playing around in your local waterways. No, I'm just kidding. So for me, it's usually whenever I was doing collection, right? I was trying to do 150 different plant species of propagation or whatever the number was, I forget. And so it gets expensive buying all these different species, especially, after you get through the first 50 or so, they get a little rarer and more expensive. So I would go out and try to collect different stuff from, especially if I'm like with my family in Idaho. What's in Idaho? Oh, I'll take that, whatever. Follow your legal local regulations. But of course, I wound up getting stuff like leeches in my tanks because of that. And I mean, they get big. Let's start there. Like they can a full-grown leech is like an impressive monster to see in a nano fish tank. Like it'll scare the crap out of you.
I do not want to see that. Yeah,
yeah,
I hope to never see that.
They get like I don't know, maybe this big just gets bigger every day I think about it. No, I mean they're much larger than a shrimp would be when they're extended and they move like a monster, right? They grab and then pull themselves and grab like oh, the thing's an alien. But I haven't noticed them actually affecting the population growth of shrimp in a notable way. So that's not to say they're beneficial because they're not. But I don't think they can eat enough shrimp to put a dent in it when you have a breeding colony. So in that capacity, I wouldn't really worry about them. Like, I mean, if you see them, take them out. They're physical, right? It's a large thing in the water. So you can just grab it and throw it away. And I would. But I wouldn't dose tanks specifically targeting, like, I don't know what would even kill it. Like, probably dewormer.
Nothing that I know of. The dewormer isn't strong
Really?
enough. You can use copper, but it'll kill your shrimp. So
Yeah.
there's nothing that can treat leeches without killing shrimp as well,
Interesting.
as far as I know on the market yet.
Yeah, except my giant fingers going in there going, no, and then you put them somewhere else. Like, that's the best treatment in the world. They've never
I've never actually
overpopulated
seen
tank either.
a post of a leech catching a shrimp and like
Nope.
eating it. Anyone's like showing a mid. You would think that someone would have shown that. So yeah, you may be right. I don't actually know how dangerous they are for the colonies. I have not had them.
My only experience where I kept both of them in a tank together, I had a 75 gallon that had leeches in it, multiple. When I saw one, I would grab it. I didn't pay attention to that tank that much, to be honest. Should have, but there were definitely, when I shut that tank down probably 3 months ago now, wow, it's crazy how time flies, I probably pulled out a handful of leeches out of that, and I probably also had a colony of 500 shrimp. So, when you have a big colony of shrimp that's thriving in a mature tank, to me, over the course of years and years and years, the leeches never took over. They never
No.
overpopulated. There's a handful of them.
Yeah. So obviously, just one person, but still useful evidence to try to help figure it out. So leeches are not as dangerous as you may think. So, let's see. Iceberg the dragon saw a snail leech attached to a shrimp once. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible that that shrimp may have died. We don't know. I'd be curious to follow up on that. But
I've also, just to call it out there, I've seen a really grotesque, as grotesque as a shrimp death can look, zoomed in, very clear footage of an assassin snail killing a Neocaridina shrimp, or at least eating and consuming one that looked like it was still alive. And at the same time, let's assume the video is not AI and doctored, because I think it was probably pre-AI. Let's assume it's true. I don't worry about it. I've kept tanks of overpopulated assassin snail tanks with big colonies of shrimp, and I've never had a problem. And there's also reports of people that say Bristlenose plecos killed all my Neocaridina shrimp, and I've kept Neocaridina shrimp with Bristlenose plecos 100 times, and a lot of people have. Most people have.
no.
And so, can things go wrong? Yes, I'm sure there's different species of leeches. I'm probably over-assuming it, right? I got this one kind of leech that just isn't a problem. If you're seeing it be a problem, treat the problem. All right, do what you can to fix the problem. my experience, leeches are not as big of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if your other option is to completely break down the tank, which is what I see as a suggestion online of like, oh, you just have to destroy the tank, bleach it all, and move your shrimp to somewhere else. It's like, I think I would probably take that risk of letting the leeches stay in, pulling out whatever I can, of course, but just seeing how it goes for a little while at least. Yeah. Okay. Cool. That is the last question we have. So, I don't know. Any last words, Adam?
I guess I don't really have a great closure on this one. I think I'm excited for these next few videos to release. I like
Definitely.
in remembering that whole like us filming for 6 hours, going through it. The part that excites me is like still to come. So all of this has been very fundamental, basic, helpful, ground floor level information. It's once you get people established on sort of the general information, that's when like the fun starts, and you can kind of start talking about more niche activity and fun stuff. So I'm excited about the episodes to come, and yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk to you guys, and I'm excited. I'm making videos on my channel with shorts now and learning how to film, and it's crazy. So I hopefully can spread some information on some RDI stuff, some remineralizer tips and tricks too. And so I'll start trying to film some of those out there too. It's good mental note for me too.
Adam has a lot of useful information that he's going to share. Be sure to catch that on Old School Aquatics. That's his channel on YouTube.
Thank you.
We have, as he said, we're going to be covering like shrimp breeding, shrimp feeding, common issues, and a ton of interesting like details of that in our videos, and then even more fun details in these live streams. So be sure to tune in 5:30 p.m. for the next, I believe, 3 weeks after this. We hope to see you then. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and happy tripping. Good night, guys.